this is really the front runner for Cradle to Cradle, because what had happened is that the social component of it was very valuable. People could walk by there and say, huh? Oh, this is related to the old building. It's a much better building because you could actually see through it, you know, with the beautiful, you know, daylighting. We really operated on the middle of the building. But if you take what we did with the outside elements of the these Core 10 panels, are you guys using any BIM technology like Revit or ArchiCAD or anything? Yeah? Okay, you know how you have all these different layers that you can turn on and turn off, and how you can show a building be assembled by just turning the layers on and make a little video of it, make it cool, show your friends. Well, now you can do it in reverse. You can take a building and document what the components are and undress a building, yeah? And put them over to the side. You can assign a little value to that, you know, because BIM is not just drafting, it's about intelligence in every element. You can say, hey, I want to measure weight, I want to measure insulation value. So it's about using BIM, it's about using a conscious thought process. I mean, you have to have a good, you know, this 10-pound thing on your shoulders, you know. You got to use our brains and think about what you can easily take off a building, what you can't. Because if you take it off and you got all these grandiose plans, and it takes all this energy to, you know, as soon as you touch it, you know, it's like a window frame or something. You touch it, and all the UV has made it degrade. Well, it's over. You're not going to be able to use it. So it's a thought process. How are we doing on time? We doing okay?
Should we have a coffee break maybe?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Have one question.
Well, we're not strangers with each other, but I introduced myself, but you never talk, you never write, you know, come on. Any other questions? I mean, renovation, that's a really good question. And a lot of people think that renovation is kind of, it's kind of dirty, you know, and maybe it's not for me. But, you know, I think that you can really have a wonderful career if you start thinking about what you're going to do with existing buildings, because they far outweigh or outnumber the amount of new buildings that are going to be coming. And all the guys that are going to be doing the new buildings are going to be big, Henning Larsen, all the big guys, you know. And there's a whole lot of other firms that are going, we can't do new buildings anymore. So wake up. You're spot on. So there's a lot to it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Maybe just one thing, not a very specific question, but we also consider crowd in terms of urban planning a little bit, because that was one of the subjects of our report. And are there any basic steps that you start considering urban planning, urban designing in terms of crowd? I got to know that that's quite a new subject in terms of crowd, because not many movements were done into this.
It's a great question. And in the case study for Park 2020, you're going to see a big urban planning investigation. And I have a couple other things in my, this is like a little traveling library here. So there's a lot we can show you for Cradle to Cradle on urban planning. It is for sure even bigger and more important than the buildings themselves. Because if you're doing a project here, and you're doing all these great things, but let's just say, you know, and you're up on a hill, but you're really doing some things that are starting to do some, cause some irritation in the ecosystem downhill, 10 meters below, and you haven't considered that. You know, the small examples. We got invited, this is my first project when I was actually hired by Bill. We entered a design competition. And this is up in Almere. It was for a nature center. And Almere, again, had certain portions of it. They had a big middle portion that was going to be a harbor. And because they didn't need a harbor, they just let it sit and kind of go to nature. This was new land, and they let it go to nature. And so the Dutch, and I can assure you, I love my Dutch colleagues, but they are complete know-it-alls. They know everything. They can forecast into the future. No problem. They said, let's leave it alone. It'll be fine. Well, it actually exceeded their statement because it became a wonderful natural wetlands. Yeah. And it was amazing how beautiful this became. It became almost as important as their park in the middle of their country. So they wanted to create a building that would reflect this wonderful serendipity, this thing that delighted them from surprise. So we said, okay, we're William McDonough and Partners. We can go in there. We'll enter this design competition. So we went in there with a really good engineering company, and we had an ecologist with us. The first thing we had is they gave us the area, and they said, you get to pick the site, okay? But you have to tell us why you picked the site. So the first thing, and this is an urban planning decision, was we went in there and we tromped through an area, and there's these beautiful tall trees. And we said, oh, wow, that's kind of weird out in the middle of this flatland. Where do these trees come from? And they were willow trees. And they had built the dikes from willow branches initially. Very old-fashioned construction, And so, on top, the little sprouts would come up. And before you knew it, these willows would just propagate through this whole area. And it was stunningly beautiful. So we said, oh, that's an area. Don't want to touch that. Let's go over here. And then you come to the nice, the dike and the rolling marshlands, and you go, we should get out there. That's nice. Of course, that's wetlands. So we said, we probably, if we impact that, we're probably going to have to pay by restoring and creating other wetlands. That's what you have to do, one for another. So I said, that's probably not as good a site. And then there's a third site that had some other kind of in-between features. And so we said, okay, we got A, B, and C, and based on our knowledge as great urban planners from Holland, this is what we're going to do. And the ecologist said, you guys got it all wrong. He said, first of all, where those tall willow trees, the willows forest, we said, is probably the last place you want to go. He said, that's what we call a monoculture. Okay, there's only one species growing there, and that's these trees. Beautiful as they are, it's really a terrible ecosystem. He said, the best thing you can do, Mr. Architect and Smarty Pants contractor? Go in there and take one of those big earth movers, just dig a big old hole and just leave it and let it fill up with water and knock a few trees down, do whatever you want, just make a mess of it. He said, you'll do a better job doing that, because what will happen is you'll bring some sunlight in, birds will come and other small animals, and you create all this diversity, and other plants will start to propagate. But because they had these beautiful willows created this canopy, it was a single species environment. And I went, man, did I get that one wrong? I was completely embarrassed. But then I said, you know what? I'm going to use this as a learning, lessons learned, that I'm going to take what I've learned knowledge-wise and then my experience, and I'm going to blend them together. And if an ecologist says, think this way, I'm going to consider it, because it's a new ballgame. And in urbanism, we're told all kinds of things like, it's all about density. We want to make sure that we're building cities that are really dense, and this is, of course, very true to preserve the outer space. But then everybody's starting to say, well, we've got to get up very tall buildings. There's lots of problems with very tall buildings. So there's a balancing point, where you find. But we'll talk more about urban level during the workshop. Were you scratching your head, or did you have a question? Scratching your head. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the fifth semester here, that's what they do, it's renovation.
Oh, it's renovation.
Yeah. So that's the renovation semester, so it focuses only on that.
Ah.
And we have quite a great material for it, as a great material, Uton.
Say that again?
I don't know if you know that product, it's Uton.
Uton.
It's a type of stone that you build with. It's almost like aerated concrete. It's
okay.
Yeah. And it's really, really good, and it's a great material.
It is certified.
It's very good to use with renovation, because it takes up moisture.
Ah.
It doesn't create any kind of problems.
Ah, okay.
So it's kind of easily both takes up and kind of.
And it's a synthetic stone that it's not quarried that way, it's put together?
It's put together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I talk about cradle to cradle, but it's tough to keep track of all the materials. I'd like to see more about that, yeah. So, yeah.
I have a small question. In the end of your presentation, you said that now we have to think of designing buildings so that we can decompose them and reuse the material somewhere else. Like, wouldn't that, after a lot of work, make some sort of material that will be multi-used and then make it it would need a lot of other buildings that will be similar to the one we're making.
A very good point. Yeah.
So
How do you do that?
it kind of makes a big problem with uniform buildings afterwards, and it's losing variety.
Okay.
Thinking a lot in the future now.
No, but for sure, that's a good point. I have a guy who's thinking about doing a project for some temporary housing in Copenhagen, in Nordhavn, the northern harbor. And if you look at a harbor, the perimeter around near the water is very valuable, right? And the inland lots aren't as valuable. So he's going to build some temporary housing there, that people can be early adapters, and so that he could take it apart. And so when the strips that come along that block all the view, and when those come in, then he will take his housing away, and then a bigger use developer will come in and build something more permanent that is less in need of the beautiful views, more services, shopping center, whatever. And then he would take his building to another similar type of site. Okay, and so we started thinking about there's certain elements that are going to be static. They're going to be fixed. So your plumbing chases, but there's parts of the building that could be delightfully taken apart and put back together in a new manner that would be kind of like when you have your Lego blocks. I got these blocks, I can put them together differently. Who knows? Maybe you take a panel, you turn it upside down. It's just a rain screen. Maybe it's not a thermal wall. Maybe it's just So I think that's the puzzle. I think that's the coolest part about it. But for sure, there's some pieces of the building that are going to be more difficult to take apart than others, especially on the outside. But right now, immediately, we're doing things on the inside that is very easy to do and very easy to transfer and make into new compositions. But yeah, you're saying if you look one to one, it'd be, are we going to become all uniform? Is it all going to be like some, yeah.
The thing is that if you have one material and you want to take it to another one, like just what you said, you can turn a panel upside down, and you have to use energy to modify that or the things around it, which means that constantly you have to use more and more energy to reuse the things that you had before.
Yeah.
So technically, in order to avoid that problem, you would have to come up with something that fits everywhere without many modifications.
Right.
Because of energy waste.
Universal joints.
Yes.
Correct. There's engineers working on it right now, patents pending all over the place. They're doing it. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I can give you sources right today. Lighthouse, Taboden engineers. Look it up. You'll see. It's interesting. They have the little U joints, and I don't know how far they are right now. It's been about a year since I talked to them, but they're one of many, and they're thinking about this. So it's exciting, but especially embedded energy. But think of it this way, like an airport. Okay, airports. You know how often they change, or hospitals, even better. I mean, as soon as they're built, they're saying, "Oh, geez, our program changed. We got to shift this around." And if they could have things that could easily plug in and plug out, they'd be thrilled. And some things they know they've planned. The guys who are the investors, they say, "This is a 30-year deal, and then this thing and stick it in the landfill." The guys who are the developers, so they already know. Think about it. They already are signing on to the idea that their whole investment is going to be thrown away and then replaced. So if you say, okay, let's spend some extra time and make these things, you make the connections and the infrastructure a little bit more static, like you're saying, but the pieces that plug in and plug out, there's kind of different layers here that you'd want to focus. It's complicated, yeah, but you can incrementally pay for that energy that they would otherwise scrape off and throw away. So that's the way they're thinking about this now. So that's what they would call creative financing models. It's really not that creative, You're paying now or paying later, So I saw another hand out there before. Yeah.
About that, like the prefabrication is kind of a scheme for the future urban development. Like they base the urban China, they build like mega cities which are empty because they have built too much. And there is architects like, for example, Jacques Pascal, who have already been designing a prefabricated city models where they have steel structures and they have small units and they are flexible and they can adapt to change. You can make different forms, so it never looks the same, even though it's based on this small number. And all this is like on the mathematical schemes and formulas. So there's like endless ways of have array of city structures based on the small numbers. And you don't need to produce too much if you don't need them. You don't need to build a house for 200 people and then in the time of crisis you can only rent it for 50 or something like this.
Yeah, it's there's compelling arguments out there in support of prefabrication. You know, the Dutch, they're crazy about pre-manufacturing and modular. You know, if you're like 1 centimeter off the module, they kick you out of the country. It's done. And I brought my colleagues to China, the Dutch colleagues, and you know they're like, we got to be 1.9 modular. And the Chinese guy, huh? What are you saying, man? You know, it's like you do it any size you want. We just, you know, so. But this science that you're talking about is, you know, the guys who study fractals, and they understand how such small, simple components can become such beautiful elements with just a little bit of variety. So I think it's, and anybody who's, you know, spatially oriented can have a lot of fun with this, and people are already doing it because, you know, because they have to. You know, it's old-fashioned formula. You know, they have to. We have to figure out how to be able to, you know, make some components. And I do kind of have the same fear. I mean, I'm not in love with Lego. Okay, I simply am not that Danish. And I see everybody, you know, heading large. They all, you know, they're building out of Lego and say, okay, you join the club. But I don't like all these square edges and stuff. You know, but in a way, it is about a Lego building. You know, you have to go back to thinking, can it plug in and can it plug out? I mean, the EU has already started to outlaw, you know, all the little all these little wire, nasty stuff has to be put into more of a universal context now, and they've legislated that because this is obsolete stuff, you know. So so why can't our buildings be less obsolete? Yeah.
And they don't even have to be square. They can be round and
Yeah.
circular.
Yeah.
Just
I know.
it can be like
I'm getting my I'm lobbying my popularity as an outsider, going, I don't like Lego, you know, boo, you know. No, but it is that kind of thinking, you know. But I've seen people that have students at what's the place at Berlage in Rotterdam that actually took buildings. It's kind of weird, but they took buildings that were implanted into the water and did these kind of biomimicry studies that saying, well, like the beavers, when they come into their domicile, they go under the water and then they come up. And I don't know why there's that, but they said, we can make buildings that can just rotate. So a wall becomes a floor and a wall becomes a ceiling. And in a way, I think it's kind of silly. But who says who and what is silly? You guys get to say, because us old guys, we're going to be dead. You know, we're gonna be gone. We're renting right now. You know, so you guys have a long way ahead to you can think about this. So it's kind of a silly thing, but it is. I make fun of it because we are in an industry full of. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but it is kind of a good old boys club. You know, around the world, they have the same stupid jokes on the trailers in Malaysia that do in Washington D.C. You know, it's like, you know, you design it, he builds it. We all make money, we go back, you know, and then we throw it away after 30 years. And a lot of the contractors don't like to think about this stuff, and a lot of architects even don't like to think about this because they say, we've been doing it this way for years, we got habits. And we're fighting against this all the time. But fortunately, I think I'm not just going to give it the cradle to cradle so much credit, but it's only been around for 5-6 years. And before that, us, you know, kind of pioneers, we'd be talking about things that would be good, you know, ecological buildings, and the developers would just kind of go, you know, they say, sure, dude, that's fine. Okay, we'll go over here and do it this way. you really, and then suddenly I say, hey, did you hear that there's some legislation? You can get some money to do this now, you know, federal money, local, state. And they say, oh, that's interesting suddenly. And they'd build one or two, and then the funding would be cut out, and then they go back to, you know, so we know what the process is, but with this type of thinking that we're going into this circular economy, instead of taking these little incremental steps, which were 2 steps forward and 1 step back, now we're taking 5 steps forward and 1 step back. The same guys are there making you go backwards every once in a while. But people can see way out. They're not thinking about just a 20-year time frame. They're thinking about 100-year, you know, experiences now. Seriously. And who can think about one building type where someone would think, if they were building a new building, would be concerned about what that building would be like in the year 99 and 100? Anybody give me an example of what building type? Would someone building a house today care about something in 100 years? Yes? No?
I care.
Thanks. I do too, but in the market, I don't think so.
Only like a weather catastrophe would hit, maybe some stuff.
Well, when you buy a house, you guys, some of you are thinking about probably buying your first house soon or whatever. You get a 30-year mortgage, huh? Right? Or ask your parents, I don't know, you know, whatever. So you're thinking about it for 30 years. And then after that, you go to Tuscany and get your retirement home. I don't know, foreign home. So most people think short term. Are there any building types that people think that the owners of the buildings think longer term than that? Think, yes.
The Japanese, they're thinking about it.
Sorry?
Because the Japanese, they have some studies because of the earthquake, so they have to do the base insulation, so have to have more lifespan.
Well, that's a good point. What I was giving you a rhetorical question, I'm afraid. Hospitals are a very good example. Hospitals will be here long past 100 years. They might be, the ownership might change, but that hospital most likely is going to be there. And there are other, you know, some schools go beyond 30 years. They have 50 years. And so when you talk to them, you know, they're like, we did a hospital in San Francisco. That was a cradle-to-cradle hospital. And we had some interventions. We said, okay, if you shape the building a certain way, okay, and face it towards the sun, you know, all the normal passive design that we know, you could realize some energy savings, and you'd get good views for the cancer patients and as a woman's cancer center, and oriented, you know, all these things that are basic design principles. And they said, okay, then you would save this much in energy. Easy. Then we said, if you go in there and then make operable windows that you can open up, and which costs more money and there's more operating costs, you could also have a certain ecological and health inside the building benefit, but it costs you some more money. And so we took that special shape, special ventilation on this big, you know, the most complicated building in the planet is a hospital. There's so many things going on. And then at the end, we also said, but what about the performance of the people inside? If you have proper daylighting, what impact does that have on absenteeism? What impact does it have on people getting sick or turnover? You know, people saying, hey, it's such a crappy place to work here. I just don't want to work there anymore. They pay me so much money, but I can't handle it anymore. The guys who own hospitals, they understand these numbers all too well. And those numbers actually paid for all the shifting of the building, the internal, all these things, because they were thinking longer term. They saw that the bottom line wasn't not just about the things and a budget to be able to pay for PV panels or ground pumps or whatever, but it was the people, the fact that they were going to make a lot more money because their people were happy and healthy and they weren't going to have to retrain new employees. That's part of your toolbox, so you can use that. And they have what they call white papers that prove this. It isn't just something that you learn in school and just say, oh, well, I learned that in school, let's do it. No, it's true. It's really true. So user of the building, seismic zones, you know, whatever, it all goes into the formula of who benefits, who pays. Yeah? Okay. Yeah? Yeah? No? Yeah? Uh,
That's it?
that could be it.
Okay.
Okay.
More questions? Not now, at least. Maybe they need some coffee.
More coffee. It's a good idea. Okay. Oh, thanks very much, you guys. Yep. Water from the north. So there's lots of things going on, but this area was where we were building this cradle-to-cradle park. So they're kind of crazy about land reclamation and water management. And they have a group called the Rijkswaterstaat. And they're the guys who control water heights. And, you know, water changing 1 centimeter outside of what they wanted to do is a big deal, I can tell you. And so this Rijkswaterstaat has also become such a big government entity that they also are involved in the building of the roads, because the roads have impact on the watershed. You name it, they're in there. So we're working with them. And there's a good reason why they're kind of crazy about water. And this is what happened in 1953 in Zeeland, just like Zeeland. And it created their, what do they call that? It'll come to me in a second, but there's an event that happened, and then after this they started to climate-proof their country with all the dikes and the way that they think about manipulating the landscape. So this is water security and water management. So 60% of the land elevation is below sea level. I mean, who does this? This is crazy. But that's why the pumping of the is so critical. And you know, you can be driving in your car, and you know, there's a big dike over here. You can see a ship, you know, going by, or you can be way out in the middle of the landscape, and you can see a ship going across the landscape, and everything is just upside down. So you say, how can that be? As soon as you see water next to a house, what do you think? God, those poor people, you know. But no, boom, they put things in the water, around the water, floating. It's pretty amazing, and it's delightfully done. It's really cool. But then their planning doctrine started to integrate all these different elements and planning principles and guidelines. We had to become familiar with this when they invited McDonough to come in and plan this office, this cradle-to-cradle office park. But these are the environmental threats: the loss of biodiversity, climate change, resources, overexploitation of natural resources, safety, unmanaged risks. So all these things are considered in any time you do anything in the Netherlands. Again, some of the Haarlemmermeer is the place that we're talking about, the little circle. Now we're a little bit zoomed in. The airport's over here. Different. You can see how it's evolved through time, and the grid has shifted. You know, it's not the north, south, east, west grid. Finally, do you guys remember when Al Gore's film came out? Inconvenient Truth. Did you see that? It's like 5 or 6 years ago. A lot of things started happening there, and this is Minister Jacqueline Kramer, and she became the minister just as I arrived to the Netherlands in 2004. This is 2005. And she became kind of cuckoo about cradle to cradle. Cuckoo to cradle to cradle. She's great. She really was. She really pushed it, and she said, we want to think this way. We must think this way. You know, because they're so close to nature, and they're so familiar with what Mother Nature can do. So it's pretty serious. It's in the DNA of. So anyways, we'll just jump right into some of the cradle-to-cradle framework and material recovery. I'm just going to, that was a little bit of the urban side, but we're going to come back to it. In the course of one structure's lifetime, you have these different elements. You get the site, that doesn't move. Well, unless it came from the sea. The structure, you do that one time most of the time. Skin, maybe you put a new skin on the building. The setting, interior partitions, systems, mechanical systems, and then the stuff. You know, and the stuff is maybe you see much more than 8 times. But if you can impact some of these things, you know, and you see how many times it's changed over, you can have a bigger benefit than maybe the structure. So it's the order of magnitude. You know, you guys were saying, you know, can I take that facade of the building and take it off? Well, look how many times you're doing the skin. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but the stuff inside of the building, there's a lot of impact there. So then we made a little graphic here to show it a little bit better. The site, the structure, the skin, and put some years to it, you know. The structure maybe 30 to 300 years. You know, we have cathedrals and, you know, monument buildings. The skin, maybe 20 years. That's pretty lousy these days. You can do a lot better than that. Systems, yeah. Systems, you know, they get sick. They get covered up. And you can't get to them, and they're buried in concrete. That's a big problem. Setting and stuff. And then we took it another level and talked about the infrastructure and landscape and made some loops about that as well. You guys get all that? Understand? Yeah? All right. C2C community planning, urban planning. For your convenience, I started translating this to English instead of the Dutch language. But whenever the Dutch are planning, they have the polders and canals, the existing large-scale elements, the landscaping strips, the individual properties, the new infrastructure, the garden strips, the entrances to Taurus Avenue, that's our site, and the waterfront areas. And you can see there's kind of a common theme, you know, like that. And it's quite beautifully done. Might be boring if you're a real, you know, organic type person, but when you're there, you start to feel that nature is still present. It's just very structured. So here's a few snapshots of some of the things that I'm really, with the time, I don't want to go too deep into this because each one of these moves were this city of Haarlemmermeer, who invited Big Bill McDonough to come into town and develop this standalone place, really worked very hand in hand with us to, if they had rules that would prohibit cradle to cradle, they'd change their rules. They would, I've never been in this situation before where they're so proactive. Of course, the things that we wanted to change were very good for, you know, the environment and whatnot, but sometimes you don't get that level of cooperation. So this shows a profile. It's close to the airport, so the building heights could get taller and taller and taller in this direction. And then there's sound and sound mitigation issues. You couldn't build housing here because it's close to the airport. And most of the time, for the urban planning part, you know, you want to try to combine as many uses. So at nighttime, there's people there. So at daytime, they can walk to work. But unfortunately, because of the airport, you can't have housing here. But a couple miles away, you can have housing. And then the regional water connectivity. Can you see the blue in there? Is it readable? Blue? I'm just curious if you can read it. We had to consider all this and all the different activities, and this is a green color here, and mapping the routes of green access for nature, for people, enjoyment. The regional high-speed train goes through here to the airport. This is a local bus system. It's talking about all the transport in the area. And then we decided that connecting that to that would be a diagonal line, and a bit arbitrary, but in a way it's not, because it's more oriented to the sun this way. The sun comes up from that way. I can show you that later. Oh, show it to you right now. How about that? You guys ever see these type of sun path charts? Oh, I'm glad to see the heads going like that. Okay, that's really important. You know what those charts look like when you're in Australia? They're facing down. Because we had a project in Australia, and I thought one of our interns, I said, don't you ever look at what you're doing? You know, it's upside down. They said, we're in Australia, David. And I said, oh. So for those of you who don't know, this is the summer sunrise, and that's off the page there, and the winter sunrise, and then this is the equinox. So it's very important to understand these. we have some modeling tools that we've used in the past. One of my favorites is something called Ecotech, and it's comes from I think it's part of Revit. But you could do so many nice modeling. You could throw a SketchUp model into this, and the next day you could size how many PV panels and how much it cost, and I mean it's just a wonderful tool. Hey, there we go. That's nice. Is that better? No, we should keep a little bit of light in here, maybe even for the back row, but just here is where we need to get this. This way, if I got to still see that you're not falling asleep, because I would like to be falling asleep. Studying the wind, crucial. We have wind power on this park. And then this is a terrible slide, but this is just the different times of day and the studies of what the shadows are doing. The solar shading on this project was super critical. I think I have a slide coming up. Yeah. Winter solstice, noon sun. We wanted to make sure that these buildings here would not shadow this internal strip of park. So we had two streets here, and in the middle this is okay. What am I looking at? I'll find a better slide. But we shaped the buildings to make sure that we didn't impact the sun in the park, and then optimizing ventilation and energy efficiency. This isn't just done. This is, by the way, is a high-rise here, so they have all this wind pressure issues and downdrafts. You guys study wind impact on buildings, high buildings and canopies, and sometimes I'm between languages. I forget what they. But the higher the building, the more of an impact it has on the drafts and what it can create. These kind of cavernous. Pardon me. Turbulence. The turbulence, yeah. Sometimes the wind flies down the facade of a building. Sometimes it flies up, and people just get sucked up. No, anyways. Yeah, but you can see the two. This is a Taurus Avenue. This is my life for like 5 years, just figuring out what we're going to do on this street, and this is the other street. This is a one-way street going this direction. Very complicated pattern of traffic, and when we impact the area, we had to do a lot of traffic studies to make sure that ingress and egress was safe, because I mean, I was Dutch trained, but the architects, McDonough, they were all operating out of the U.S. Ooh, sorry, I'm playing with this. Don't do that, right? And of course, they know about bicycles, but they didn't know that, when you cross the main in and out egress to the garage, it's an underground garage through here, that when the people come out, they're going to have to first look for, bicycles going by, and then pedestrians, and then if there's any service vehicles, and so these are all incremental things, but they are there. They're there strongly. They're there, and they dominate the automobile society. This just like in Copenhagen. So I think the Americans got a pretty good training on how it's done in Holland. But so this is a plan that was done before what we call the Great Credit Crisis. Okay, and all these different function buildings. This is a hotel, and this is a high-rise for the World Trade Center. That was a signed deal. These were. This is the first building that got built. These are other buildings that. This is being built right now, and this one's built. But all these different buildings, we had a number of different schemes, but it was all to be interconnected into a closed-loop energy waste system, and that meant that each individual building played a role and as a part of the whole. Well, 2008 happened, and the World Trade Center tower dead. That's not going to happen. One of the other deals went away, and suddenly we were down to taking buildings that were from 20,000 square meters down to 5 and 4 and 3,000 square meters, and doing just a few of them at a time. we had envisioned building this whole park. This is a constructed wetlands, by the way. This is how we clean our black water, our toilet water, and make it into irrigation water. We were even going to go to drink water as well, but that's another, there's some difficulties with that. It can be done. Anyways, this whole process was thwarted by the credit crisis. And so this is before I joined Bill's group. I was with the Dutch group that became that were doing the local work. And, suddenly nothing worked anymore because we didn't have the economy of scale. We couldn't build an independent. We're going to generate our own energy by burning wood chips. They have some really nice technology for that, and also wind. And so and we also had a living machine for the sewage and that we were going to be doing, and it was all going to be centered in this area because these were the big buildings were. But we couldn't build all this infrastructure without having these other elements that were going to pay for it and use it. So, man, we had a problem. Thank you. Okay, so this is a big problem, and I think that we've done a pretty good job considering, but it's a good lesson. You can't plan anything. Sorry, you can't. I mean, this is such a beautiful, eloquent plan, and then because of the crisis, nothing was going to be built. But lo and behold, this building here, we finally got a deal going, and that's been built, and I'll show you some results. But back to urban planning, these were the buildings that we're going to be doing. A lot of amenities to try to make this as much of an active place during the workday, and even a chance for people to do their shopping before they go home at night. And some of the people might only be as far as here living, so it's not that far away from housing. It's walkable, it's almost walkable, and but yeah, housing is not allowed. And this is definitely a big part of the story here with the mass transit. Lovely transit conditions there. Integrated energy systems with combined heat and power, CHP. Biogas. This is some old information because it evolved through necessity. But this is interesting. The restaurants were treated in living machine housed in central facility. Well, the restaurant here, we made 2 pavilions. It's cool. We made a biological nutrient pavilion, and that's where the restaurant is. It's made of wood. It's made of all these natural things. It's very nice, good food. And then we made a technical pavilion, which is down at the end here. This is after I had left the project, but and then in between here, where there's all this empty land, and they couldn't build this water yet. They built some temporary greenhouses. So all the food that they eat at this restaurant is organically grown, and they can just walk down there, pick a little basil, go on back, just like your restaurant, in Italy. And it is nice, and it tastes great, and and they're doing pretty well. And those pavilions we studied those pavilions. I wish I had the drawings here, to be removable buildings, and they are removable buildings. But we had them placed on rails at first, so we could just slide them up and down this area. But that cost too much money. We had so many great ideas, and you just have to be patient with it. But you have to present it. You have to give them the options. Of course, the opportunities for rooftops. The higher the building goes, the less opportunity you have to develop solar energy on the roofs. You can do it on the vertical surfaces, but you pay a price in efficiency. Water purification systems, green roofs, retard the runoff, all the things that you know about green roofs. Have you done any projects with green roofs? Yeah? Do you enjoy those type of projects? Interesting? Yeah? Yeah? Boring? Yeah? I think they're great. I think they're coming back. But when I was a boy, they would not let us, consider like underground housing. They said, that's how moles live. You should build in the glory of light and all this stuff. And of course, green roofs are over the terrain. So I think there's some really lovely projects now that are coming up. But you know, you can only put in so much green roof and so much solar panels, so it's always a balance. What are you going to do? And then the integrated water systems for cleaning the water, making everything work in your favor. So we did have to go back and see, you know, this is our little baby site here. You know, what's contributing to the watershed here? The Floriade, have you ever heard of the Floriade? It's the 10-year flower show that they have in Holland. And this is one of the sites for the Floriade once. And this is a big part of the, this is where a lot of the flowers that come in on the planes, or the import-export, really cool area. But so this is all watershed, and this is one of the last remaining wetlands down here. This all used to be wetlands, but you know, they took it over for land a century ago. This is what it looks like today. I'm getting a little homesick.